Hello there, this is an A-Level exam guide video and it's going to take you through everything you're going to need to know for your A-Level photography exam. Where to start, looking at examples and also showing you the process that you're going to need to follow. I'm going to touch on assessment objectives but mainly focus on those examples. Those are going to be really key in helping you with your exam unit. This is a copy of the exam paper as it is at the moment, which is in 2023 for the AQA June submission. This shows you all of the questions but just on 2 slides instead of 3 slides, which makes it a little bit easier to see. The main thing that you need to do is, in terms of selecting a question, thinking about research, is look at examples. It's a really key process, key practice for all students to follow. And if you click in the link in the description below, you'll be able to get access to all of the examples from a selection of differently graded units from my school. It will help you to see what those students have done in their sketchbooks as well as what they did on their exam day sheets, and it's all presented in graded folders for you to look at. Sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to access, even if you've got the link below, so this little video will show you how to just quickly access that link. Click the link in the description or copy and paste the bit link, then you'll be able to access the different folders. They say the grades on them, and then just click on them. As you click on them, you'll see that most of the time the thumbnails will load pretty quickly, and then select one of those different folders and then click on each of the different images. That will take you through a progression of each student's work. This one is a really amazing A-star unit of work that was completed based on the parts and sections exam question, and it goes through all the way through to the exam day sheets, showing you the different progression through the sketchbook so you can see an example of what does an A-star look like. Or if you're going for a different grade or you want to see what different grades were assessed by, you can see those as well. There are also other videos that you could then check out which are on the YouTube channel, which are really helpful because they show different examples of videos from across different exams, all to do with A-Level, all to do with photography, and that should give you an idea of how other students have planned and prepared their work. Another essential part of knowing what you're doing is the timing. Know your dates, know your times, know when your exam is so you can plan and not leave everything to the last minute. Bear in mind your mentality. You don't have the time to do what you will have done in your coursework. It's a much shorter unit of time. So please make sure you bear that in mind when it comes to your planning, the sets that you organise to take, and then also the developments you intend to take, making sure you factor in what you're going to do across your 3-day exam. None of which you should fully know about right at the moment. You should be planning, experimenting. That's the sort of thing the examiners will want to see. This slide is just showing you the assessment objectives that you are marked by. Know the words, understand what it's about, understand what each of those assessment objectives is asking of you, and know what your work looks like in comparison to them. This image on the screen here is just showing a slide that I give to my students that shows the types of things that they should be thinking about in terms of the assessment objectives and the book pages that they need to be assembling. This is a work in process in photography. Generally, most of the time, a lot of my students will stick to this. It's no problem if you jump in front or you jump behind at different points, but this is a general workflow to follow. The key one there is the red one there, the developments and experiments. Sometimes you're going to need to go back. You're going to need to think about intentional things that you've got and then conventional things as well as traditional and something a little bit more experimental. The finalising part there, the AO4 part, that will be done in your 3-day exam. This slide here, this is a little copy of one of the exam units that is inside that resource link folder that's in the links, and a really good example of how a student would start their work. Across these 2 different slides you'll see here, the first slide has got like the first 3 pages, the next the rest of the remaining 4, and it's how this student has started. They've definitely annotated that exam paper. It is so key to show your connection with the exam paper, and that's your dialogue with the examiner. You need to make sure you're explaining which question you've picked and why you've picked it. You can pick elements of different questions, but you must pick one and stick to that rigidly. This particular exam was based on parts and sections, and even down to the annotation and that initial intentions that the student has wrote, the research that they've then formed on that lower right hand side image there. They started off doing the research roughly before they then formalised it, which you can see on this slide here. That rough note making and annotation is really helpful for the examiner to see, so they can see your process and how you followed connections for the different artists that you've picked. The bottom 2 images here are showing 2 really key parts that you need to get right. The examiners want to see set plans and they want to see drawings. It's not about the artistic quality of those drawings, it's about the idea that you're communicating. It's not just for AO1, it's for AO3 as well. Show your ideas, get them in. It will give you something to refer to, it will give you something to talk about with your teacher so you can share your plans and ideas with them. And then the last couple of images here are just showing the students' first couple of sets. Following the sort of processes they learned throughout the coursework, what was good practice, talking about the rule of thirds, analysing the connections, explaining what worked in the set and explaining what they're going to do if they refine it then the next time. It's very key that you look at good examples of sketchbook pages, not just the progression all the way through, not just to nick ideas, but just to see how has someone done it, what could you do that would be a little bit different, have you covered the bases. Even something as straightforward as talking about the rule of thirds, some students can forget. And like with most students, it's the cropping and selecting of contact sheets. It's so essential to have that dialogue with the examiner. This slide is just showing what you do after you have completed looking at a few examples and once you've found a question that you like. That's the process right there. Make a mood board, make a plan, make a drawings page, and then get straight into your photos. When it comes to mood boarding, there's nothing quite as good as Pinterest, not that I've found yet, but also Behance is a fantastic site that you can look at to add in different themes, different sort of types of artists and artwork, and it will show you then what current practitioners are currently making. Once you've got your Pinterest mood board, mixture from Google, Behance, whatever you're using, then it's sometimes that students will take print screens of that or print the images off and then start to present them. I always recommend that students spend a significant time doing this and looking to see what else could possibly be connected on this site. And once you've looked through Behance and you've looked through Pinterest, assemble yourself a mood board. Sometimes students do that in PowerPoint or on Photoshop, and then once you've got those different mood board images together, you need to annotate them. Don't just leave it blank. This sheet here is just showing the type of thing which I'd like to see my students annotating around their mood boards. It's used for art as well, and it's the same sort of thing across the board. It's suggesting that you answer questions such as, what is the image? How could this influence your investigation? How does it connect to your question? And then draw examples and diagrams that could just show that idea and how that could be made. Some students have then combined that with a little bit of a planning slide or a mind map idea. This is the daddy of all mind maps that I had from an exam unit a few years back, that's not only sort of showing a connection to the assessment objectives and what the overall plan was, but then also there's book page plans on there that might not have been as rigidly stuck to, but they gave this student a start, they gave this student a basis. This slide is showing a PowerPoint slide that is where a student has picked the theme, picked their question, and they've then started to construct a possible way that they could go at that question and respond to it, looking at artist connections and ideas to start off that investigation. This slide is showing the drawings page, and it's really key that you don't worry too much about the aesthetic of this page. It's to communicate the idea for AO1 and AO3. Look at good examples and make sure you make one yourself. Some students quite like to do this on white paper with a black pen, then photograph them and invert them in Photoshop to ensure that they are then showing a different way of presenting their work. Once you've got to that sort of a stage, it's then down to making sure you take a hell of a lot of photos, as many as you possibly can, because when the exam starts, you will not be able to add to your prep book. The prep is frozen at the start of your exam. The only work that you can submit after that point is the work that you've made on the exam that is clearly labelled as exam work. That's a really strict rule from the AQA. You need to make sure you don't get strung up or held back by that. So when you are taking sets of images, don't just take the one you intended. Respond to what you've taken. Could you refine it? Could the idea be changed at all? Could you go back and revisit artists? And then it's down to how you develop those ideas and those techniques. Talk about camera settings. Make sure that you not only connect to the artist you're looking at, but just to see, is your work actually following a journey of development? If that journey is not clear to you, then it won't be clear to the examiner, so make sure you check that. This slide here is just talking about a couple of no-brainers, and it's images and information that I show to my students when they're starting a unit to make sure that they're thinking about things in the right possible way. I'll also be sort of explaining and including examples of checklists and things for all my students to check as they go through to ensure that their responses are the best that they possibly can be. This image here is talking about serendipity, those marvellous little accidents that sometimes happen. And this slide here, it wasn't supposed to look like this projection was wearing a bra, but that's what it looked like, just down to the layering and the actual technique at the time. But that became quite an important part of the work where this student tried to forcibly reenact the mistakes that they were making. It was relevant to what the person was doing, it was about women's rights, so the idea of the bra and the imagery was really relevant and a really unusual accident to capitalise on. And that's what it's about, capitalising sometimes on those accidents, but you have to be aware of them when they happen. This next slide is just saying that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you don't have to hit everything with a Photoshop gun in order to make it successful. Sometimes those subtle, simplistic and sophisticated approaches can be more than enough. That's one of the things that can really help you to get to those higher levels of marking. So think about doing that. How is your work sophisticated and what can you do to drive it and push it towards that? Narratives are an important one. If you are telling a story for your photographs within the sets that you are doing, make sure you're looking at effective photographers that have then also done that. There's a couple in the slide here, such as Lucinda Chouard and then also Helmut Newton, very big hitters in the photography world anyway, but it's the way they tell the story and it's how they used models within the set very simplistically to make the drama and to create that atmosphere. Make sure you think about that in your work, unless the narrative is not a point of which case you might not want to do that. This slide here, this is a QIA page, not to be confused with the CIA. It just means question, intentions and artist research page. It's really important that at some point you consolidate your information about what question have you picked, what were your intentions, what are your artist connections, and this can be done nearer to the end of the work using the images that you've taken so far. This slide here, this is a little assessment objective checklist, and it's really essential that for each of the different points, the research, the starting points, experimenting, the final pieces, you make sure you have these essentials. So take a little print screen off the screen, make a little list yourself, and just make sure you're checking this off. It's really key that you do this at the end of the unit as well as the beginning to make sure you know what you're doing. This is a really important slide for me and for what I share with my students. It sounds a bit odd saying like the 5 R's, but it's things that you need to check that you're doing. Does your work relate to your artists? Does it relate to your previous sets? Could you talk about how you could refine it? What was wrong with the set or the developments you've taken, that was it quite right? Then you need to make sure you're writing that. Reviewing the work that you're doing to target future developments. Have you realised the connection and said how it connects and maybe how you could then possibly improve that? And then have you revealed your understanding of the artist techniques or the developments you've been making? All really key things. The last couple of slides, because I don't want this video to drag on too much, this is just a have you checklist, and it's things to check off as you're going through. Have you done the following things? If you haven't and you want to get high marks, do them. This slide, really important, should be important for artists and photographers everywhere. How do you avoid cliche stuff that's been done all the time, seen before? Examiners hate it as well. Make sure that if you're doing something about global warming, you just don't melt an ice cube and stick it on top of a globe, or if you're doing something to do with waste or pollution, you just don't photograph cigarettes in gutters. The examiner will have seen it a million times before, and that will give you a penalty because they've seen cliche responses, even if they're the most well taken, well composed images that you can take. So just be aware, cliche is bad. I often get some of my students to make a page that says avoiding cliche responses so they can show that they understand that this is an important part of the work. This is the final slide. This is just an everything checklist that I always make sure that my students check off at the end. I give it to students at the start of the exam to make sure that they have everything that they need so they feel fully planned up. The best way to go at this exam is planning. The best thing to do is prepare. So when you go into your exam, you understand that you have got a really strong body of prep work behind you, which constitutes to up to 75% of your exam grade. And then the remaining 25%, roughly in terms of AO4, is your final piece, what you do on those exam days. So a good body of prep work, high quality prep work will help you not only prepare for the exam, but also to get the best possible grade that you can. I hope this video has been of some help to you guys. If you have any questions, please put them in the messages and comments below. Thank you, goodbye.